My name is Maive Rute and I work in the European Commission, in the arm of the Commission which is called Joint Research Centre. And I'm really delighted to be here in this morning. I noticed that you have actually a certain advantage over me because you have been here already yesterday. And as I was able to observe over the breakfast, such a good energy already, a lot of networking happening, people already spontaneously walking up to others and blinking and networking. So really it was great to see. So I missed that part a bit, but at least I was able to use then the breakfast atmosphere to get into the mode of this conference, which is, I think, very much about collaboration, networking, and building on our mutual strength. So for those of you who are not from the European countries, because we have here also some international delegates, let me just mention that, of course, European Commission is one of the institutions of the European Union, and it's the engine of the Common European Project. It's the executive arm of it. But the Joint Research Centre, which is part of the European Commission, is really a rather unusual setting. Since on one hand, we are a research institute with approximately 3,000 people working, most of them researchers on various topics from really, I would say, almost fundamental science, but then a large range of issues on social sciences, modeling, and all kind of evidence and modeling and analysis for the Commission policy work. So that's what we do. We provide support and analysis and information for Commission policy work. And of course help also in the monitoring of the implementation. So I come from the Joint Research Centre, and as you just heard, I'm the Deputy to the Director General there. So it's today a really interesting opportunity to speak to you, because I also see that I'm probably one of the few or possibly the only speaker from the Commission, which would allow me to perhaps share with you a bit more than just what we do in the Joint Research Centre. My intention was to also share with you perhaps few notes on a broader landscape, few elements which are really part of the European policies nowadays on the gender equality. So I would first walk you through, let's say, a bit of a broader landscape, and then give examples what we do in the Joint Research Centre to promote this agenda. So, ladies and gentlemen, clearly we in the Commission take gender equality issues very seriously, and this has now really for years already been part of the Commission policy making. Specific targets have been established, measures have been put forward. So let me just maybe illustrate the situation where we stand today, and then indeed come with more concrete examples of my own service area. You may know that we have in Europe this European Institute for Gender Equality, and the Institute is providing us with some rather interesting analytics about what if we would really manage to bring about more gender equality in Europe. And they have in 2017, so this year, published a study looking at, they have modeled what would happen if really Europe would achieve gender equality by 2050, so still many years to go. But what comes out of it is that this would have really a significant effect on our well-being and on our level of wealth. So the GDP per capita would increase between 6% up to 9.6. So let's say the estimates are almost up to 10% per capita GDP if gender equality would be really put in place. And quite a significant part of it, the estimations are that about a third of this additional growth would come actually from really going forward in the STEM areas. So really bringing more women into the STEM in the studies, and then later, of course, in the labor force area. So Europe has a great opportunity, which I hope that with people like yourselves here, we should promote and try to get forward. They also have given some figures as to estimated additional jobs, particularly in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so STEM areas. Looking at it, that it would be about 850,000 up to 1,200,000 more jobs. Again, hoping that these additional million of jobs would be basically then women taking up STEM jobs. And you know that equality between women and men is one of the European Union's priorities and really founding values. So it goes back to 1957, when the principle of equal pay for equal work became part of the Treaty of Rome. So already really from our grounding documents, we have this settled. The Article 23 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights states that equality between women and men must be ensured in all areas, including employment, work, and pay. And since 60 years, the Commission has indeed been has been pushing for these values, and quite some progress has been achieved. And mainly it's thanks to equal treatment being really part of the legislation, the gender mainstreaming, which means integration of the gender perspective into all other policies, has also been part of the recent trends in moving forward, and also measures, various other measures for advancement of women in specific sectors. And we can really indeed see some encouraging trends. For example, that the share of women in labor market in Europe is improving. And we also can see women really much better represented in training and in education. But we also still see within the European Union that there is quite a lot of difference between the countries. If we look at the labor force, the women who are in active employment, for example, there is quite an important difference between Nordic countries, which tend to be really very much advanced, especially Sweden, where women are much more able to combine careers and family life, and then some of our southern member states where it's more difficult. So there, I think also throughout the Union, we still have some work to do to help everybody really advance and be able to benefit from the opportunities. So despite of this progress, we still see that gender gaps remain. And in the labor market, women are still overrepresented in lower paid sectors and underrepresented in decision-making positions. And my own home country, Estonia, is really, I would say, a case of a point to make here. On one hand, it is a member state, it's a country where women are very well represented in the labor force. So it's one of the countries where many women can combine family life and a job. But on the other hand, it's also one of the countries where the pay gap still is rather large, where indeed women tend to take more lower paid jobs and perhaps do not reach the decision-making level quite to the, let's say, share which would be proper. So indeed, even in those countries where otherwise women are quite well already represented in the universities and in the labor force in general, there is still work to do in order to improve on the equal pay, for example. So to address some of these shortcomings, strategic engagement for gender equality document was adopted by the Commission at the end of 2015. So when the new Commission came to office, this was one of the first things which was looked at. And this document, this strategic engagement document, focuses on 5 areas, which are First, increasing female labor market participation and economic independence, which should be then part of the Economic Policies Commission is endorsing. Secondly, reducing the gender pay, earnings and pension gap, and thus fighting poverty among women. Thirdly, promoting equality between women and men in decision-making. Fourth, combating gender-based violence and protecting and supporting victims. And fifth, promoting gender equality and women's rights across the world. And this strategic engagement document, of course, then goes much more in detail and has 30 concrete actions to put these ideas, these targets forward. So any of you who would like to see more concretely, please take a look. And then on the more overarching policy area, it's also important to mention that gender issues are very well also highlighted in the overarching policy documents, the so-called Europe 2020 document, which of course is for us kind of a baseline document for all other policies. I already mentioned the European Institute for Gender Equality, which follows up on the implementation and provides quite interesting, I think, statistics as well. One of their big, I would say, achievements is that since they regularly publish statistics, they also trigger good debates in the countries. Again, in my home country, the pay gap statistics each year really triggers a lot of public debate and really helps to raise awareness and raise understanding that the situation as it is today is not necessarily optimal. So this institute has, for example, also now come up with Gender Equality Index, which shows that the overall score of EU in achieving the gender equality is only barely 53 points out of 100. So it's 52.9 points out of 100 possible points on gender equality, which of course means that we are only halfway through in achieving gender equality. So Commission is acting on these issues. And very recently, one of the key deliverables of the new European pillar of social rights, Commission has proposed an initiative to support a better work-life balance for working parents and carers. And this is one of the initiatives that helps strengthen the social dimension of the Union. And it's also, of course, one of those ways how we are trying to put forward the gender equality goals in Europe. So this was on the policy level. Now, if we look at the Commission itself as an institution, then again, at the end of 2015, the Commission has decided for our own institution that we should also become more diverse and inclusive, and that we should also ourselves follow the gender equality which we are otherwise promoting through our policies. So certain targets have been established for middle and senior management to have more women, in fact, in the management in the Commission. And Commission has set the target of 40% women in the management positions. Various steps have been taken since 2015. Talent management programs, specifically dedicated mentoring programs for women who have the capacity and potential. And also, I would say, a certain monitoring whether the recruitments in the various directorates general really take up this target of 40%. And I must say this has really helped. So we don't necessarily have quota as such, but we have targets which mobilize our services to really give more opportunities for women. So if there are equal candidates whose skills and merits are comparable, then the idea is to try and give opportunity to a woman. And in my part of the Commission, so in the Joint Research Center, we have last year adopted a new strategy until 2030. And we, as a basis of this strategy, have also established a set of values. And one of these values out of 5 is actually inclusiveness, which really underpins many of the things we do in the Joint Research Center. And we don't think that inclusiveness or inclusion is only about kind of big things. It's very often about everyday decisions which are taken, or the way how the work is divided. So we should no longer have kind of a reflex that women are always there for notes to be taken or minutes to be taken in the meetings, and men are there for big decisions. So really, we try to get to a situation whereby we break away from such old stereotypes, and we empower people at all levels to do and give best of their talents. In the JRC, we start from a relatively low level of women in the management. So it was even below 17% of women in the middle management, and now we are trying to then build it up towards the Commission target of 40%. But at least in the senior management, which in our case would be directors and deputy director generals and director general level, we are now at 40%, and this, I think, is already quite an achievement itself, and helps us to set role models for younger, aspiring ladies to come forward and try to also become managers. I'm among those also in the Commission who is available for mentoring for those aspiring younger colleagues. And just before coming here, actually the day before yesterday, I had one of these mentoring conversations. And I thought it would be interesting to build a couple of her observations to the conversation we have here. And the questions which we have come through now over the sessions with her, I think are really quite revealing, and I will mention a few of them to you. So, the things we have discussed with her. How to get visibility. So she is somebody who is really hardworking and very intelligent, and I think somebody who can really put forward her ideas in very clear way. But she feels that in meetings, somehow she doesn't really get the recognition which her intervention should merit. So how to really get visibility, and how not to be perceived aggressive, or how not to be perceived as somehow arrogant if she pushes for her ideas in the setting where normally or very often men are expected to say the big things. So how to really do that? So how to also be perceived as competent, how to be perceived as somebody who has management talent and management capacity in a group where she currently works, where there are some very strong and let's say somehow dominant men in the group. So how to also then, of course, achieve balance in the working life, because she also has kids and aging parents, as many of us face. How to really get this under control? How be the best in networking? With whom to network? How do you really do that? How do you even find time for that? And she also gave me some very interesting examples of meetings where she would come up with a proposal or a good idea, and at the end of the long meeting, people would think that it was a man who gave this idea. So she's just taken aback by that. So how do you actually overcome that? How do you make sure that you will be seen as the author of this good idea? And indeed, and how to say sometimes no to the tasks which you see are not really helping you progress in your career, but will be just eating up your time, and maybe somebody else should be doing it. Because very often women are lumped with additional work because somebody has to do it, and it's easier maybe to ask her or to do it than somebody else. So for me, this was very revealing that a lot of it is really about, in a way, culture still. So, and we are clearly working throughout the Commission services, trying to change this culture which is still there. And some of these issues are definitely subconscious because people don't do it deliberately. It just happens. So I'm sure throughout these 2 days here, we discuss a lot what can one do about such kind of deep-rooted issues. But in the Joint Research Center then, what we have done is to really try to bring role models. So female senior managers are now in place, as I mentioned. We are also, we have put forward a specific talent management program whereby 60 of our aspiring colleagues have gone through it and are now, throughout actually last year, we had a full set of trainings and mentoring for them. So they are now ready to try their luck in becoming managers. Some of them not necessarily managers being now managers of a unit, but we have also quite a lot of managerial tasks or jobs which are not always formal. For example, we have so-called communities of practice where we are mobilizing various services around the topic. So to be a lead person for a community of practice is again an opportunity to have a managerial, shall I say, experience, not necessarily being in the hierarchical kind of organizational chart, but doing a managerial job and getting, of course, the visibility and getting the recognition and the skills that come with it. We have also opened up competitions for deputy management positions in our units. And since we are a relatively large organization with about 70 units, we do hope that we will, through this exercise, bring more women into at least the first step of the organigram, so to say, managerial positions, and from there, then they can go forward also. Furthermore, we are very much promoting recruitment of younger researchers, female researchers, so that we would have really the opportunity to bring up the young researchers at some point then to managerial levels as well. And we are quite proud that our female job uptake is really now very good, around 45% in fact of our labor force. So with these efforts, we do hope that we will have set really the basis for Joint Research Center to become much more balanced and diverse in our labor force than we were just a few years ago. And I do hope that throughout these 2 days here, we will all go back with good ideas. What can we do more and how to make it really work? So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for a few questions or comments if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maive. That was a lot of stimulating data, experience, even some best practices baked in there. Who has a question for Maive? If not, I'm going to jump in here because, yes, Ita. Please tell us your name and where you're from.
Ita Richardson from the University of Limerick in Ireland. So what I'm curious about is I've been really interested in where the Commission have been wanting us as researchers to bring gender into science. And I suppose, again, it's getting to the, you have two proposals on the table, and one is looking at the gender into science as distinct from the women being involved in the proposal. So it's the science part I'm very interested in. I'm wondering, have you had to make many decisions based on that? Have there been proposals have actually won because they've done that properly?
Yes, I think you have a very, is it working? Yes, a very good question. In fact, what you're referring to is really the Horizon 2020 research funding program, framework program, which Commission runs. And there, which is a different department, so not my department, but I'm happy to share with you. There indeed, in the evaluation criteria for projects, gender equality has been built in. So if you look at what is evaluated, first comes scientific excellence. So this has to be there for all projects whatsoever. Then secondly, they are looking, or we are looking, I should probably say, we are looking at the impact And thirdly, we're looking at the organization. So under the organization, one of the criteria which is assessed is whether the organization is balanced, whether the people who are going to do the research actually also have, for example, ladies in the group. And this is part of the briefing we give to the evaluators of the projects. So they look at also other elements, for example, whether the consortia which is put together, whether they are also balanced as to how many member states are part of it. So gender balance is among those criteria which is looked at. But what I was referring to before was Commission internal recruitment. So when we recruit for managerial positions, the logic is that if there are two candidates with equal merits, we should prefer a lady. And this, as I said, has already given some outcomes, positive outcomes, so that Commission has over the last 2-3 years really improved the number of women in middle and senior management. We are not quite yet at 40%, but give us a few more years, so we'll definitely go in this direction.
Personally, I'd like to see some numbers on how many more middle-aged white men are getting research contracts, but that's just me. Wouldn't that be interesting? Any other questions?
My name is Maria Mantini-Satta from Bologna. I am senior gender expert, and you underline a very common issue that is very underestimated. We all know that women need self-esteem, empowerment, and what you talked about, it was that lady was not trained on power dynamics, especially male power dynamics. And before getting into this meeting, they should be trained about it. Otherwise, what happened will always repeat. They need to be trained on power dynamics, to be strategic.
Indeed, I can only concur with what you say. But it was interesting. The example she gave me was just a usual, a meeting where they were discussing a certain subject. So it was not about recruitment or anything. It was just a discussion between colleagues. Absolutely. And that's where she came back and she was like, I can't believe it.
All meetings have power dynamics at any level. And we have to be aware of this. And male dynamics are different from ours. And we have to know about it.
Indeed, and that's why I think the various training programs, what we call now talent development programs, are very useful because they touch upon these issues.
I might also share with you, I don't know if you've heard about man-interrupting and, what's the word, broappropriating. It takes good mediators in meetings to manage those dynamics. And I don't know if you heard that in the Obama White House, the women in the meetings actually took action to amplify the things that the other women were saying to make sure that the woman who said it got the credit for having come up with the idea originally. I think one last one. Okay, there's a question here.
Hi. Just an observation on what you said
Your
about...
name, please?
Sorry, Julia Rouse from Manchester Metropolitan University. An observation of what you said about targets. So I work with a big multinational bank, and they have set targets. And very interestingly, they've said, well, look, we have targets for all sorts of things. They're supposed to nudge managers in creative and different ways to move towards them. We can have targets around this as well. It's a kind of different language for talking about it. But I also work with women who work in middle management in that bank. And the culture is anything but what is the message that's going out at the top. If I give you an example, a woman recently said she was offered a promotion but only on the assurance that she wasn't going to have a baby. Oh. Okay, and she said this is normal, this is normal, this is her everyday working culture. So I wonder about the strengthening of the hard side of this, which is regulation. So in the UK, we are still, just for a little bit, still European members. And yet, you never know what might happen, you know. You never know. We live in a tiny bit of hope. And yet they have just been able, under EU regulations, to increase the costs of going to a tribunal to the point where they have fallen catastrophically off a cliff. Basically, women are unprotected by the law in the UK right now against sex discrimination. So regulation underlies all of this in the end, culture change.
Yes, I think partly, well, this is of course a long and very painful conversation, I'm sure. But maybe what I would like to say in this regard is that, again, if I come back to the Commission as an organization, because that's where your comment started, within an organization, be it private sector, bank, there are of course different ways how one would live up to these targets. So, in my personal case, I must say I have really changed my mind dramatically about these targets. When I came to the Commission, I was very strongly against any gender quota or gender target or whatever have you. Because my view was that if there will be this quota established, we will be seen as some sort of a token woman because, you don't have any other merits, you're just a woman, but they need a woman, so they take you. But I think this is really wrong. In order to somehow get through this very deep-rooted stereotypes and culture we have to start somewhere. So for me, the way how Commission has now created these targets and actually follows through these targets by monitoring annually the progress towards these targets works within our own organization, because this is something that is coming from top and this is monitored through. And with the recruitments also, because we have, of course, a central service which is checking whom do we recruit and what proposals we come up with. So if they see, let's say, a report or the proposal whereby candidates have been evaluated, have been interviewed, and for some reason the service does not want to take a woman, they would question it. And there have been situations where the proposals coming from particular part of the Commission have been turned around. And they have said, look, basically they have suggested to look again, and on few occasions, actually, women have been given the jobs. So targets can work if really there is a will and there is also a management support to it. And if you just do a kind of a target for kind of a, I don't know, publicity purpose, of course it doesn't help. But I wouldn't enter into the whole regulation area because I definitely don't have the competence there, but I can very well see your point. Thank you.
I see there was one more question from one of our speakers yesterday. Could she have fiat, maybe, Ms. Korat? Yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very informative presentation. I didn't get a chance to mention it yesterday, so I want to make a comment and ask a question. At UNESCO, when we made gender equality a global priority, which I mentioned yesterday in 2007, we also put targets for our own house, for the Secretariat, and we wanted to have 50% women in decision-making levels at UNESCO in the Secretariat, and we put a date, 2015. Now, in between, we had several unexpected events happening, including a serious budget cut. But despite that, we managed to go from 24% of women in decision-making in 2010 to 47% women in decision-making as of January 2017. So I just wanted to mention that when there are strong policies, strong targets, and proactive measures, things can move in the right direction. So I wanted to ask you why you set the target at 40% and not 50%, because we had that discussion at UNESCO when we were setting the target. As the Secretariat, we were conservative and we wanted to be, not look too ambitious, so we proposed 40% from the Secretariat. But our member states said, why not 50%? Women are 50% of the population. So your reasoning for the 40%. Thank you.
It's a good question. I think the 40% came as a kind of a compromise between, let's say, the reality where the actual share was much lower, and then what the Commission, the current Commission, hopes to arrive at within the 5 years when they are in the, in the lead. Beyond that, of course, we will see what the next Commission will do. And you also understand that, you definitely know you have the same situation, that to recruit somebody, of course, a former head of unit or director will either need to move out or retire. So the options are not so many. And in order to really arrive at the new balance, we have to more or less use almost all recruitments to see if we can bring women in. So it was, I think, a kind of a pragmatic compromise, what could be achieved if we really go for it. And I must say for the Commission, even this 40% is quite ambitious. Since just let's say the departures or retirements are not, there are people leaving, but they're not so many. So even to reach the 40%, it takes work. But then we will see indeed with the next Commission arriving after this one, what their targets are going to be.
On that very forward-looking note, can we all give Maive a round of applause? Thank you so much for coming. Looking forward to seeing you in Brussels.